Eyewitness News PolitiCast. We're doing this a little bit early, but it's going to be a preview of the vice presidential debate between Minnesota Governor Tim, not Tim, oh yeah, Tim Walz. I was almost going to say Tim Kaine, and I don't know if maybe that's a symptom of the similarities between the two Tims. But Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and, of course, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, Walz the Democrat, Vance the Republican. This is going to be an interesting debate, I think, mostly because it seems to be a large agreement that there's going to be more substance in this debate than what we saw from really the first two presidential debates.
Let's hope so. And I'd like to really hear from Senator Vance on some of the comments we've heard lately that are just so blatantly racist coming out of the GOP. I would like to hear from him, a clear message that that is not going to be tolerated. It should not be tolerated regardless of political party. And I don't know if you saw that atrocious tweet that came out regarding the Haitian immigrants from a sitting representative this week, but it's very disheartening to watch. And I actually was just in Aurora, Colorado to go to ground zero of where some of other rumors have been flying around to find out the truth of myself. So maybe we'll talk about that during this discussion if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's something to bring up too. I mean, maybe that's just getting right to the heart of it because the heart of it seems to be for Vance, the delegation of the role, Brittany, that he's had is to be the explainer for the president, right? And Mike Pence was doing that in a more toned down level when he was the vice president. But now JD Vance, he doesn't seem like he has that same level of the ability to lower the temperature in a room that Mike Pence does, and JD Vance is a little bit more of the attack dog, and maybe someone who can try to explain his best Trump's argument as best he can at the same level that Trump's arguing.
I mean, I think if that's what he's been brought in to do, he's not necessarily doing the best job because if you recall during the debate a few weeks ago, when things were asked about, oh, well, JD Vance has said this on your behalf, and the former president said, well, he and I haven't even talked about this ourselves. So, I don't know why he's saying this because I haven't even talked to him about it. And I think once again, we just see Trump sort of not being helpful to himself and to his brand and always the insults and the personal attacks and not being able to stick with policy. And to your question about whether this is going to be more substantive than what we saw in the presidential debate, though I think we should all be hopeful, I'm also doubtful. It's the vice presidential debate. I want to hear from the candidates, but ultimately it's the presidents, those who are running for president, that I'm really interested in hearing from. And what I was looking at some polling today, and when you're looking at Vance and Walz, Vance has a higher unfavorability rating than Walz does right now. And Walz has a higher favorability rating than Vance does right now. And also he has a couple of points there of people who are just unfamiliar with him. So I think that's all going to play out next week when they have the debate. But I don't know if he's done the best messaging on behalf of the president or the former president, only because, the former president is the best at messaging himself.
Right, and not to and to bring this argument as close to, not to both sides an argument, but to throw it from the perspective of Walz as well. The visual of having Tim Walz appear in that first sit-down interview with Kamala Harris was ridiculed by many. A lot of times it just opened himself up to a lot of criticism of his past military service and questions about what exactly that was. There's going to be a look to him as well as kind of the explainer too, because she hasn't had these one-on-one sit-down interviews. And now we're several months after the fact that folks were criticizing the first couple weeks that she hadn't been taking those interviews. Her most recent one, the first one-on-one interview, is of course with someone who has gone to bat for her on several occasions in Stephanie Ruhle. So I guess the question is on the Walz area is what can he bring to this debate? Is he an explainer of policy, or is he continuing to be, I guess, the theme of that campaign, which is an explainer of joy, Christina?
Well, there's going to be a stark contrast between the two candidates, I think, especially if Senator Vance continues with the attacks and, making these claims that Haitian migrants are eating cats and all of these things he's been saying, basically like a Trump 2.0. I think that he needs to really differentiate himself if he wants to do well. And with Governor Walz, they have been talking about or campaigning on the idea that they're bringing joy forth. He does have an infectious personality, whether or not you agree with his policy. And I mean, he's just a much more likable politician. And so if he comes out with that and, he gives personal anecdotes and brings that part in the heart to the campaign, I think he'll win over some voters because so many are just sick of politics as usual. And the only vote, I mean, there's a lot of voters right now who are like, okay, look, Trump had better policy. I don't care about his personality. My life was better during the Trump years, so I'm going to vote Trump. Fine. But there are a lot of undecided voters who are like, I just can't bring myself to vote or to go for Trump Vance because of the rhetoric. And so Governor Walz does have an opportunity there to really contrast himself in that regard.
Yeah, and as far as Governor Walz is concerned, I think that's maybe the biggest difference between himself and Tim Kaine is, man, he really does have a boisterous personality as well, being the governor of Minnesota, and he has that energy, I think, that and that joy in his own personality that seems to bring in some other people. I know the big thing with him, especially his recent campaign events, have been reaching out to white men, particularly young white men, to get them to vote for him. Brittany, is this going to be a debate where you're going to see very clever moments like you saw with Kamala Harris in terms of argument that maybe he's going to be using as a rhetorical device to bring people in to the Harris-Walz campaign themselves?
I think it's called the White Dudes for Harris or something like that, or for Harris. And you know what? I mean, politics, it's all about being able to be a big umbrella and bring people into the fold. So whatever they want to call themselves on either side of the aisle, I think it's great. I think that every vote deserves to be earned by these political parties. And if that's what he's been brought in to do to an extent and sort of close the gap in some of those areas, I mean, I think it makes sense. Like we were talking about earlier, he seems to be very likable. I mean, I just think when he was on the DNC stage and, you know, his sweet son Gus, and then Republican, it makes me so upset, right? Like I'm a Republican, and immediately Republicans were mocking him, and it was us. And that's really just not okay at all, acceptable in any capacity. And what a sweet moment. I mean, shouldn't we all want to be the type of parent who warrants that kind of reaction from your child because they love you so much? Like, I think that says a lot about him. I think that ultimately politics is kind of about who do you want to have a beer with at the end of the day. And it's definitely going to be a battle of personalities here. And he seems to be, you know, when it was conversations about is it going to be Shapiro or like who is it going to be, Shapiro to me as someone who is a disenfranchised Republican seemed like a better fit just because it's Pennsylvania, but Walz has been, I think, incredibly impressive as far as the personality fit for this campaign. Now, will I be voting for Team Harris? No, I will not. I'll still be writing in a Republican. But you know what? It does make one take a look and be like, you know, he seems like a really good guy.
Yeah, and to kind of focus on that too, I mean, how much of this, we asked this question with the presidential debate, and we kind of knew what the answer was as far as is this going to be more personality and character versus the policy. I think that's a more legitimate question in this case. And of course, Christina, if you'd like to talk about some of the work that you've been doing in Aurora as well, because I imagine that can take a lot of questions too, more of what defending, I guess, what Republicans have said and the Trump administration has said more than actual policy in this debate.
Well, it's been so painful to watch humans become just part of this political game that the Republicans have played. And this is where I think they're actually losing voters. So I went to Aurora, Colorado, because I was curious. Obviously, the immigration situation is a complete mess at the border. And I think that if Kamala Harris, and Governor Walz want to really put a dent in that and calm some voters' concerns, they should address that head on. And Governor Walz should talk about that in the upcoming debate on concrete steps they're going to take, what they're going to do differently, maybe, than the last 4 years, or what Kamala will do differently than the last 4 years to actually get that under control, since she was the border czar, as the right always likes to say. So I do think that she should talk about that. She has acknowledged it's an issue, and she's been a lot more moderate when you've heard her campaigning in Pennsylvania recently. She's even come off as like a Romney Republican in some regards, and she's talking about being a capitalist and the like. Back to Aurora. So, I went on the ground. I went there because I wanted to see for myself if it was true what was being said on the right, that Venezuelan gangs have taken over the entire city. And so I went to the buildings that had allegedly been taken over by Venezuelan gangs. And I spoke to residents. I spoke to the city. I spoke to law enforcement. And I got down in the end, what I found is that, yes, there is Venezuelan gang presence, certainly in Aurora. They've had about 10 they've identified. They've arrested 8 as of last week. So they are there, and it's a problem. And sure, it's linked to our broken immigration system, which we must fix immediately. Every day that goes by, we're just putting ourselves more at risk. However, gangs have not taken over the entire city, and the way immigrants have been painted is just, not showing them the dignity and respect that they deserve, because all immigrants are being lumped into this. And I think that when you use that political ploy, what you're really doing is you're undermining the ability to address these issues, because you're dangling a carrot over here, you're distracting from the real issue, and then nothing's getting done because you're arguing back and forth in political ping pong about whether or not this is actually happening, instead of getting to the root cause of, say, gangs in America. The vast majority of the about million or so gang members in America are US citizens. So what is the root cause of that? The root cause is actually poverty, people who are disenfranchised. And so, let's not distract from the root cause of the issues just to serve political gain. I don't like seeing that. I think it turns off a lot of voters too.
Yeah, it seems like that's going to be a big conversation and talking point, is how much is going to be a focus on people who are coming over the border, and maybe what the processes are and what they should be at the border. I know we talk about that a lot in our particular congressional districts, especially when it comes to reforming, how many border judges we have, what immigration policy looks like. The question I think will be, Brittany, is going to be how does JD Vance, when he's going to be, because we imagine he's going to be fact checked, or at least his running mate will be fact checked, and the question will be referring to him. How does he respond in situations where he's going to have to be put on the back foot?
Yeah, I mean, I know that during the last debate, there was complaints that Trump was fact checked every 2 seconds, and then Harris wasn't fact checked as much. People can decide how they feel about that, but perhaps one candidate was a little bit more dishonest than the other. And, that's just my personal opinion. When it comes to Vance on this issue, I think that he's going to be more disciplined than Trump. I think that he knows people are going to be watching him to see if he has any more gaffes. And I think that he's going to be prepared. Earlier this week, I saw that I think it's Tom Emmer, who is the Republican whip, or the majority whip, is the one who is going to be playing Walz in their debate prep. And I think that, when it comes to taking a back seat, I mean, that's kind of what the job of the vice president is, until this moment when it's Vice President Harris running, in which case everything that's gone wrong is obviously her fault, right? Which I do agree with that to an extent with the Biden administration, because you are, in the leadership position. But I think that I think that he's going to be prepared. I think that he's been a fighter. He is that attack dog. And I think what his struggle will be is if he's able to keep a cool head. So I'm very interested to see that.
Yeah, and last few questions here. I want to focus on Vance, because we've talked so much about what Trump has said over the last several weeks, and of course we look at Harris claims as well. We focus so much on these top 2 candidates, but we're the focus really here, and I think it came up a month or 2 ago, but now it's being brought back to the surface, especially with the looming debate, is the childless cat lady comments. It's the one remark that we can see made from Vance that has been kind of the focus of ire. How fast do we expect to see that question coming up in the debate, and how much do we expect the Harris-Walz campaign to take advantage of that and plan that around that, or some sort of soundbite around that for this coming debate, Christina?
100% chance. 100% chance it's coming up in the debate. And I think people want to hear about that, even people who might plan on voting for Vance and Trump. Just hear what he has to say. It was said some time ago. How does he feel today? I don't know. Put him on the spot and hear what he has to say. And it would be a fair question for sure.
I think it's absolutely going to be brought up. I think the Harris-Walz campaign are going to have memes at the ready. They've been very strong on that. When we recall Brat Summer, right, and like the lime green, electric green, Brat, and on their social media pages. And so, yeah, I think it's going to come up. And he just did that was sort of like his first test, like one of the first things that, he was hit on, and he just flubbed that so bad. And as a communicator, as a communications professional, I mean, there is a way to go about that where he could have just been, you know what, I was trying to be funny. It was crass. I really don't think that, and then move on. And months later, we wouldn't be talking about this ultimately coming up on the debate stage, which it 100% will. So I hope he's better prepared than he has been all these last few months, but I guess time will tell.
And as far as the Tim Walz critiques are concerned, I think the big two that seem to come up are one, a lack of identification about the military service, which he's gone back on and apologized for past remarks, or had said here's a clarification about this and this time in the service. And then the other one is the handling of the George Floyd protests and riots in Minnesota and Minneapolis at that time. And of course, that's actually kind of been a bit of a back and forth between himself and President Trump, each of them kind of tossing each other a football as far as how that looks goes out there. But that seems to be potentially a weak optic in an election where, again, you want to turn down the temperature in the room. Christina, I guess how does he go about remarks, and I imagine that will come up in the debate as well, whether prompted by the moderators or not, about how he handled the protests back in 2020 and its future aftermath?
I think he needs to be honest, and voters are going to want to hear his position on that now. And how would he respond today? And what's sorely lacking in politics in general is authenticity, and he comes off much more authentic, I think, than Senator Vance. And so, well, we'll see how they both present themselves. But it's just really important that he comes clean, he's honest, and he talks about what he would do today. And I think that will be very telling.
Yeah, and Brittany, do you think the same as well in this particular scenario?
I think honesty is the best policy, and being able to reflect on that. I think that's what's needed in politics. When we look at Vance and the comments about the cat lady that we were just talking about, I think that's something that was lacking in that response. Now, is what happened during the riots very much more consequential than, cat lady comments, of course. But I think that it sort of is illuminating to one's character. And so if he's able to navigate that well.
I'm just curious if we should say specifically which part for people who are watching this, because is it the fact that he was praised by Trump actually with his initial response? Like, can you just say that?
So the whole thing has been this idea that he was praised by Trump first. There was a leaked voicemail that had gone out, and of course Trump had remarked about, oh, hey, we like Tim. Tim's a good guy, and we went back and also saw a tweet on that as well. And then also going back to now, you're seeing Trump at a lot of his rallies about remarking that Walz was looking for help, crying for help, and trying to get as much help as he could to Tim Walz. And that's kind of the controversy, the back and forth between the two, and the need to and not send the National Guard in for what had to be done as at the time law enforcement was looking to lock up particular protesters and rioters that were involved at the time. That's kind of the pretense to the back and forth fighting between the governor of Minnesota and the former president.
Yeah, it's interesting because as Governor Walz and Vice President Harris are attempting to be more moderate and appealing to independent voters, Trump's praise might gets them over to their side. I don't know. This is a weird political cycle. Anything's possible, but that's another possibility.
Yeah, it's been an interesting one because you can look at both campaigns and say, oh, there's a little bit of interesting back and forth between the two so far. Especially if we want to look at the Harris campaign as well, it's been referring to some of the policies that Trump had originally wanted, which was the tax on tips, being harder on the border, and all of a sudden she's incorporated in that. And I think the argument, Christina, I just want to get you in on this too, is that you would say, okay, those are common sense things, right? That's not the rest of what Trump has to offer. That's a little bit on the other side. These are some things that maybe we can come to agreement on and pull those people in. Is that right?
Yeah, and people are dying for common sense right now, and to restore some sort of just sanity to our world because it feels long gone.
And the last question I want to have is about that question on character. Of course, you're referring earlier to that remark by Clay Higgins, the tweet. We won't necessarily say what's inside of it, but we can tell you it's not a great thing that he had put out. I went to University of Iowa. I was in the J school at the time that Steve King was there, who made several remarks over the years, and finally it kind of culminated. He barely won a very heavily Republican leaning district against the Democrat. Then a couple years later, he was finally beaten in the primary and ousted. That same regard, though, it didn't seem like it had too much of a national impact at the time. What does a remark like the one that the representative from Louisiana made, what impact does that have in just a couple months less than our time that we're going to be at the polls and voting?
I would say that the greater problem at hand is that the reason he even made that comment to begin with is because the folks at the top of the Republican ticket have allowed him to do so. And as a Republican who likes to think of herself as very common sense and normal, it is incredibly frustrating when we continue to see these people make ridiculous comments, when we continue to see the former president hand in hand with Laura Loomer, though they're taking a break right now, we'll see how long that lasts, refusing to condemn Mark Robinson, and just allowing this rhetoric. This rhetoric exists because the former president lights a fire within these individuals where they think like, oh, well, he says it, I'm going to say it too. I'm going to be a baby Trump. And the reality is that there will never be someone quite like him. At least I hope that's the case. So I don't, like I said, I don't think it's necessarily what Representative Clay Higgins has said. It is that Trump has allowed that sort of rhetoric, and it won't just be him. It'll be another member. It'll be a state senator. It's going to be your neighbor. And that is a problem for me.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the way in which we have normalized this speech is disgusting. I'm looking right now at the contents of what that tweet says from Rep. Higgins, and I was equally disgusted when I saw it and first read it earlier. It is unacceptable. It must be denounced, and we need to normalize decency once again. I would love to see that, especially from the people who are running for president of this country, because it's not only important for Americans, but the rest of the world is watching. We just had the UN General Assembly this week in New York, and the rest of the world looks to us, and right now they're laughing.
Thank you both for jumping on with me and previewing this a little bit ahead of time, and we'll look forward to seeing what happens next week. Thank you so much.